After nearly 2 seasons, Mercedes finally found the ideal sweet spot for the ride height that has been plaguing the car and Lewis Hamilton. The mastermind, James Alisson, finally worked his magic to get this troubling problem gone from the car. What does this mean for Mercedes? Stay until the end of the video to find out. After a challenging 2022 season due to significant rule changes, Mercedes faced another difficult start to the current racing season. Their W14 car was not performing well and was falling behind Red Bull's RB19. However, Mercedes has shown improvement lately through a substantial update to their car. Despite making significant upgrades, the gap between Mercedes and the leading team Red Bull is still quite considerable. Since transitioning to ground effect cars at the beginning of the 2022 season, the German manufacturer has faced a tough period. The W13 model from the previous year struggled with a phenomenon called porpoising, causing difficulties with maintaining the right height above the track. This led to a situation where the car generated downforce only when it was very close to the ground. This presented a dual problem. First, the risk of bouncing due to increased downforce levels, and second, the need to use rigid suspension settings to cope with this setup. However, the stiff suspension made the car vulnerable to issues on uneven tracks and raised curbs. For the current W14 model, the team's goal was to create downforce across a broader range of ride heights. They believed this would be easier with the FIA's decision to raise the edge of the floors by 15 mm. However, it seems that Mercedes was overly careful with its approach to the car's ride height. Instead of running the car very close to the ground like other teams, they kept it at a higher level. This cautious approach cost them performance potential. Technical Director James Alisson recently confirmed that the decision was made to avoid potential problems with bouncing. He mentioned that even though they made good progress the previous year, a new rule change in 2023 provided some protection against bouncing issues. During the winter, they had to make a choice: take a bold approach for better performance by sacrificing some of the bouncing protection from the rule change, or be more careful to prevent the kind of bouncing problems that harmed their performance last year. They opted for the cautious route because it would be easier to fix if they made a mistake. As the year progressed, they realized that their cautious approach was too careful, and they needed to make adjustments to address this issue. The current cars are incredibly complex, especially due to their reliance on controlling swirling air patterns under the car. So, if there's a big change in the car's height from the ground, it requires a complete rethinking of how the aerodynamics work. Doing such a major change during the season is almost impossible. Instead, Mercedes believes that they can only really fix this issue when they design a new car during the winter break. They had the car too low in 2022 and too high this year, but now the Chief Technical Officer Mike Elliott thinks they have figured out the right approach for their W15 car in 2024. In response to a question from the media, Elliott explained that Mercedes faced a significant challenge due to the limitations on aerodynamic testing. The team had only a limited number of testing opportunities, so they needed to make decisions and stick to them. If they attempted to develop a car that would work well with both high and low ride heights, they would end up testing too much without making meaningful progress. Instead, they had to choose a specific direction and commit to it. As they learned from their testing, they could make small adjustments to that chosen direction. Elliott believes that Mercedes has successfully positioned themselves well for the upcoming winter break. While Mercedes is primarily concentrating on the 2024 car now, Elliott has mentioned that they will still continue to develop the W14 car as much as possible. He believes there's still a lot to learn and there's a chance to compete for a good position in the championship. The team will keep making improvements to this year's car, but their main attention is on next year's model. Elliott is confident that working on this year's car won't hurt their efforts for the next season, even though the design is expected to be quite different. He emphasized their main goal is to win world championships, and that's where their focus lies. He explained that when creating a completely new car with major changes, it's challenging to maintain a high pace of development. Some of the work they're doing on this year's car is valuable for learning and improving without negatively affecting the progress of next year's car. Former driver turned commentator Timo Glock expresses concern about Mercedes' struggles with understanding the new generation of Formula One cars. details. In his recent column for Sky Germany, Glock notes that Mercedes appears to be facing bouncing issues similar to those from the 2022 season. He mentions the challenge faced by Toto Wolff's team in reconciling the data from wind tunnel testing with the actual on-track performance. Glock acknowledges that Mercedes used to excel in this area, with updates from the wind tunnel consistently translating well to the track. However, he points out that the team is currently grappling with the complexities of the new car generation, and finding solutions is taking a considerable amount of time. Despite some progress, Glock highlights a setback at the Spa race. In terms of Max Verstappen's dominant performance for Red Bull, Glock believes that there's currently no clear way for other teams to compete with him. He humorously suggests that perhaps Verstappen would need to race with challenging conditions, like using hard tires or without a front wing throughout the weekend. Glock praises Verstappen's consistent excellence and teamwork, noting the seamless coordination between the driver and the team. He regards Verstappen's achievements as remarkable and commendable. This information provides valuable insight by indicating that Mercedes is still struggling to find their direction and grasp the necessary program management to address their issues. When Mike Elliott refers to harnessing vortices under the floor, he's essentially talking about the science of fluid dynamics. This concept is akin to the principles used in jet engines. It involves compressing and accelerating air to create a pressure difference that effectively pulls the car downwards. This process doesn't use turbine stages like in jet engines. For instance, Red Bull Racing has managed to achieve 60% of their required downforce using this method. This means that redirecting 60% of the car's aerodynamic downward force, which typically causes drag, through a more efficient process involving suction, effectively minimizing the drag. Other teams that achieve, say, 45%, 50% or 55% are at a disadvantage of around 5 to 10%. This means they have less effective downforce, with more drag, which places more load on the power unit to achieve a certain speed. This can lead to decreased reliability, and even with these trade-offs, the car remains slower. In simpler terms, getting the vortices under the car to create downforce like Red Bull does is incredibly complex and impactful. If a team can't achieve similar levels of downforce, they're at a disadvantage, needing more power to go the same speed, which can hurt both speed and reliability. For those who understand aircraft takeoff procedures, you're aware that factors like air density and temperature significantly influence things like takeoff distance and engine efficiency. Now, let's apply this to Formula 1. Imagine the car's floor is too close to the hot asphalt, like 55 degrees Celsius. The air that gets pulled in and accelerated underneath is affected by its density and moisture. This means that even a small difference, let's say 5 to 10 millimeters in ride height, can cause notable changes in how the air behaves. The aim is to create a special kind of suction using ground effect, similar to what airplanes use during takeoff. However, to achieve this in Formula 1, the car's suspension system is designed to work against it. This leads to the first problem: crafting the car's design around this ground effect principle. Once that's optimized, the next step is to create the top part of the car with the least possible drag in history. Wind tunnel testing becomes useful for this aspect of design, while it's not as effective for the ground effect part due to how aero tunnels are set up. The ground effect aspect involves the expertise of fluid dynamics specialists. Assuming they have successfully managed the fluid dynamics, adjusted the suspension, reduced drag, and optimized the engine, there are still challenges related to the engine's size, weight, and transmission capacity. And then, one more important factor is hydraulic loading. Red Bull Racing intentionally directs more air to one side of the car during turns, which helps keep the car stable. This strategy was clearly visible when observing Perez's car in curved tunnels. This design contributes to the remarkable stability of their car, especially in medium and high-speed corners. The car scoops in more air on the inside of the turn, providing stability, while the outer side with less air experiences a different load. It seems Mercedes is aware of these factors, but their response is uncertain. Due to intricate challenges involved and considering the budget limitations, Red Bull Racing had the opportunity to work on these aspects before the budget cap was implemented. As a result, it's challenging for other teams to quickly catch up within the current budget restrictions. It might take until 2026 or later for other teams to close the performance gap effectively.